I'm an old soul. I spent so much time in my younger years surrounded by uncles, aunts, and grandparents. I tell people I was supposed to be born in the 40s or 50s. But even when I was a kid, we had to get up to change the channel on the TV. And we didn't know who was calling us when the phone rang. People even showed up to your house unexpectedly. Well, because they were in the neighborhood. Wherever you grew up, you experienced a childhood that can never be duplicated. Good times, bad times, we struggled, we laughed, we ate, and we cried. I want to go back and hear your story. They say you can't live in the past, but we can hang out there for a while. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited today. I have a good friend, David Moscow. It's a pleasure to have you on.
So happy to be here, my friend.
Yes, haven't seen you in forever. Funny story, not funny, but cool story is we were Wiffle Ball buddies in LA. So we were introduced to each other through a mutual friend, and we used to kick it and play Wiffle Ball on the weekends. I mean, like we were 10-year-olds, right?
Hardcore Wiffle Ball too, like it was
Hardcore
fierce.
Wiffle Ball. We had some really, really competitive games.
Yeah, it's true.
We did.
It sounds very strange to talk about this, but it was competitive. And it came out from New York. That game existed. I had a theater company back in like 2000 and maybe even earlier. And the theater company folded, but the only thing that remained was this Wiffle Ball tournament that was down in Soho, on like Prince and Thompson. And there's a park there, and we used to play. We had a wiffle ball tourney that lasted all summer, as long as it was warm. It lasted, and then as what happens in our industry, people come out to LA, and the game followed me out to LA, and then you joined, which was awesome.
It was phenomenal. It was great. Some of my favorite times were just playing wiffle ball. I mean, like I said, you go back to a child. Wiffle ball, no matter how old you are, you feel like you're a kid again. But that was a great time. And listen, the cool thing about that is just like this show, it's going back into your childhood during the good times, right? Like, know, and looking at you, I mean, you were a child actor. If people don't know, obviously you played Tom Hanks as a kid in Big. And I know people have asked you a million questions, interviews about it. But my question to you in regards to that was, when the movie came out and now you're this teenager, how did life change? Like, what was going to school or just hanging out with friends? Like, what was that feeling? Was it a positive feeling with your friends around? Or was it like, wow, you're famous? But like, what did you feel at that age? You're still a kid. So how did it feel at that age to be famous and on one of the biggest movies of that time?
That's a good question. I don't think I've ever been asked it. It was a magical time. I came from a very working class family in New York. We didn't watch films at all, and Hollywood was not part of our life. My dad and mom. My mom was a nurse. She was going to nursing school at that time, and my dad was a community activist. We had very little money, and I think I had seen one movie. I'd seen Fantasia, and we went out to Fantasia and we got robbed. So we never saw another movie again. Somebody had broke into our house, and so when becoming an actor was kind of like this, like very left field thing. And then it was my second audition, so it happened very quickly that things went, wild. And because it happened quickly, I never knew any period of time as an actor where it wasn't that way. So it was a mix. There was a lot of positive things. Trips to LA. My friends came out to live with me in the summertime when I was shooting. And, so that was really cool. Everyone got to be extras in all my movies, my childhood friends and stuff. And then the other time being in the city, I was a city kid, and there was sometimes friction. People would want to not be nice to the kid from Big. So if I had to go to a party, I had to call up a group of friends, and we were going to roll deep to the party, make sure that everything was kosher. And yeah, because there's, you know, when everyone is looking at you, you walk into a room. I mean, I remember I went to a buddy of mine went to a Cardoza in Queens, and I went to visit him, and everybody left their classrooms to come and look in his classroom, and they literally had to like shut down the school for a minute and get me out. So it was wild ride right there. I mean, we were the #1 movie in the country, and then Hanks was nominated for Academy Awards. Penny was nominated for Academy Awards. So it was a really kind of mind-blowing experience. And then from then on, I was an actor that you become friends with the other actors in the city, and you kind of like find this group that's doing the same thing that you're doing, as well as you have your home friends, and school friends.
I can relate to that. Just being around, you got to find the crew that understands you.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. Also it was the 80s. So it's different time. There's a lot of craziness in New York City in the
Oh my
80s.
gosh.
You know what I mean? So you
Yeah.
came, you got famous at a time that was a wild time. So I mean, a lot of kids that were young actors didn't have the path that you led, which is, an ode to you, right? I mean, that's also another side of it.
Yeah, well, I think that like generally, I actually think that kind of gets blown out of proportion. I think that there's always a percentage wherever you come from that kind of don't make it out, right?
In any field, right? Sports,
In any field.
entertainment. Yeah.
And then you have ones that are able to stick around long enough that it pops for them. Or they just decide one day, I'm going to go into real estate, um, so yeah, I think what I love now is that crew from when I was young. A lot of them have stuck around, and whether they are, the fifth lead on a cop drama for 20 years and they're doing well, or I was I am close with Adrian Brody, and he's probably going to get nominated for his second Oscar right now. So that's awesome. He was a city kid as well. Yeah, like a lot of those kids from back then that I used to run around with are still here, and I still see them, which is pretty neat.
That's the beauty of it. I mean, those stories are the great stories. So let's take it back a few years before Big. What did David Moscow want to be when he was 10? Like, who did you want to be anything at that age? Was it something you were into? Did you see yourself different before the fame?
My gosh. Um, what was I like? I think, I barely remember it, number one, right? That's around that time where you're just I can kind of remember who I was then. I loved Star Wars. I loved being Luke Skywalker. My best friend, Gia, she was Princess Leia. And what's crazy, she brought it up to us the other day. My son's name is Harrison, and her son's name is Luke,
No
which
way.
is totally from that moment
That
in
is
time.
wild.
Isn't that cool?
That is cool,
So,
man. I love stuff like that.
yeah. I love playing stickball. I love playing handball. A lot of time in the park. My parents were those parents where they like kicked you out of the house. They were like, "Get out!" And you were 9 a.m., 8 a.m. You were out across the street in the park with your friends.
I mean, that was the era we grew up. It was the street lights came on and you went home.
That's right. That's right. Someone would come out and yell for you, or
That's
the
it.
street lights came on, or somebody got hurt,
Or
and then you
somebody
would
get hurt.
run, run.
I could hear my mother's voice from blocks away. I would
Totally.
Joseph, and I was gone, and because she had that loud Italian voice, and you
Yep.
could hear even if I didn't hear it, one of my friends or a neighbor heard. So it was like those our kids don't know about that time. They have no idea.
No. No.
Thankfully, you know.
Well, I think that there's something to be gained and there's something that's lost, right? Like you and I probably could go anywhere in the world and exist comfortably without worrying about ourselves, right? Like I think we have built up. If you were born in the city in the 80s, I'll speak from the being born in the Bronx in the 80s, like you could drop me off pretty much anywhere and I could like handle myself, right? I'm not sure if the kids today, if that could happen, right? Like I think my kids will probably need adult supervision all the way until they're adults,
Agreed.
right? Whereas I rode the subway, downtown. I think my best friend and I lived next door to each other, and I think our parents started letting us ride the subway to school when we were 11. So that was early, but that's what we did. And then I had auditions, so I would have to stay in the city later. So I would get on the subway. I would leave in the morning when it was dark, and I would come home on the subway when it was dark.
Man.
That was wild, you
Man, it was a
know?
tough time for your parents. Think about we're parents now, and man, I mean, maybe they just didn't have the worry, or if they did, they just knew that that was what it was, right? I mean,
Yeah.
but it did make us trendsetters and innovators because of we had to figure things out ourselves on the fly. When my
Hmm.
daughter will ask me to to do something, I didn't have that luxury to do it. I was just already outside, so I had to figure it out. Or I just came home and my mother said, "I'm busy. Go, you'll figure it out."
That's
So it's
right.
different.
That's right. You had to build your own grit, and you had to navigate like people. You had to like it was a wild time. The '80s in New York was crazy. What's the song? It's I rode the train in the '80s. It's LP and Killer Mike.
Oh.
Panther like a Panther. He just talks about riding like on the subway with the crazies, and that was and that was what it was like. You were like 14, 15 years old, going around the city like derelicts, right? Like we would leave in the morning. Sometimes our fun thing would be to walk the city. We would walk from uptown in the Bronx. My buddy lived in Inwood, so we would walk down to his house on 190th. We would grab him, and then we would walk all the way down to our friends in the village or wherever and hang. And that was our day. Like we didn't do anything. Like there's actually a crazy thing. Like on 191st Street on the A, there is a long straight tunnel for the train. And we would go onto the tracks and walk from 190th to like 168th because you could see. And then every now and then you would like step back into like the thing in the train.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
If our parents knew the insanity, but yeah, that's what. And then you would get downtown and like your buddy down there would be like, "My dad said you could stay," so then the three of you would like crash at your friend's house for 2 days, and then your parents would be like, "What is happening? Where are you?" And you
You're
like
like
didn't have a
12 years
change of
old, like
clothes.
staying away for the weekend.
That's right.
It's
Because
just
we were a little older. We were a little older doing it. That was like 15, 16. But
well, it's still
like,
15, 16. You think about that. 15, 16. I remember getting on the train. I lived in Yonkers, so we would just maybe like somebody would drop us off at the train, like the 4 train or the 1,
right,
whichever
right.
side we were on. And my mother would say one rule: if you're gonna go to the city, don't go to 42nd Street. Like that's what she
That
because
was a rule. That was the scary place.
that was the scary place, and she
Yeah,
knew
yeah.
that. But how many times did we would oh, I'm gonna go over here,
I
I'm gonna
know.
get
I
Chinese
know.
stars, or I'm gonna go get all crazy stuff that
Yeah.
don't play the 3 card monte, like,
Chinese stars. That's
yeah, just
hilarious.
sick things, brass knuckles. Like one thing when we got into a problem back then, like maybe somebody had a knife, right? But nowadays these kids, 15, 14 kids have guns. So it was a different time. People fought it out. Nowadays it's even more scary, because of the
Yeah.
gun factor. We didn't really grow up on that way to handle a problem.
It is very scary as a parent, today when and I think about it, we think about it a lot. Our kids are about to go to school, my youngest, and and my wife is terrified about school shootings that are going on, and that never entered into our mind. I mean, you might get jumped. There might be like you had beef with people. Um, but that kind of the neighborhood always sort of like sussed that out. And there were always people who looked out for you and they would squash it if it was a problem that was too big. Um, but yeah, today I remember the first time, I think I was in my 20s. We saw a gun. Somebody flashed a gun like when we were like 14 years old on the Upper West Side of all places. And this guy wanted money from us, and we were like, no. And then he like showed it to us, so then we handed over the money, not thinking that he was not going to do anything with that. But then we were on the basketball court on Riverside, and we were playing ball, and a guy pulled out. He had it in like a paper bag, and we
That's
all
old school.
we all scattered, and that was like, holy smokes! All right, this is a new era, like where whatever that violence was happening in the drug world was spilling over into kind of like the everyday
Well,
life.
when you witness so many things when you're young, when you're older, things don't really like phase you as much. And that's what I feel like the advantage we had, right? Like, and especially growing up in the epicenter of New York, where you had friends from all different cultures, races. By the time you got into the work field or college, you already knew everyone. You know how
Hmm.
to adapt to every person, right? So, like, I think
Yeah,
that's our advantage, where I think a lot of, today kids are not out and about in that mix. So, it's a different time, but school actually was like a safe haven. It really was. You were safe at school. You had older teachers. It
that's
was a
very
different
true.
feel. A lot of the teachers now are younger, and no knock to them, but it was a different time. You had felt like you were comfortable in school. Where now, as a parent, I feel the same way like you were saying. It's a nervous thing.
Yeah, yeah. I think school. You're right. Like I went to a really neat small school. Uh, um, this is high school. I went to a really neat little small school where there were the basketball players, there were the people who drew comic books, there were like the musicians, uh, uh, some rough kids as well. But nobody in the school was ever like, it was rare that there was something that happened that was serious in the school. Where I think you hear about that a lot today. And then before that, like maybe it was just that when you're a kid, you live in that sort of like rose colored world where even when it was tough stuff, even if like people bothered you on the recess yard, it never felt like it was the end of the world. It always just felt like life was a big adventure. That was,
Very true. Even
yeah.
if you were felt threatened, it was just part of life. Where now everything, especially remember we have social media. Everybody has a phone, right?
Amplifies it all. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't have anything. There was no connection. You were lucky to get to the payphone to call your mom, right?
That's right. That's right.
So wasn't you couldn't get to everyone. So it was a different time. Everything wasn't recorded. There wasn't security cameras everywhere. There
Uh,
wasn't. So it was a different time we grew up. I want to go into like the music side. Who did you listen to as a kid, like band wise? What type of music were you into during your younger days?
well, I had different um, older people in my life giving me different sets of music. So I had older cousins. My cousins are from Utah, Salt Lake City.
Wow.
So that was like heavy metal. So that was like Metallica, Megadeth. Um, oh, what's that one? Iron Maiden. I remember my cousin
Wow.
Brandon was listening to Iron Maiden. Then Alethea, she was more of like I don't know, punk, you would call it, or industrial music. And then in the Bronx at that time, it was like um, Roxanne. It was the beginning of hip hop.
Yep.
And then going all the way through high school, you really had, I mean, that was when hip hop took off. Um, and on the side in high school, because then I had the the acting life, and so that was really sort of like alternative music.
So a
Trying to think
great
of,
mix of
oh
your
yeah,
yeah.
I was a real music fan. I started going to concerts young, because my parents were sort of like they were like he can handle himself. So my buddies and I would go. I went to a really transformative concert. 15 years old, I was. It was at Roseland
Roseland, yeah.
or Irving Plaza. I forget one of
Mm.
those two. And the headliner was the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and the two opening bands, it was Smashing Pumpkins and a band that was calling itself Mookie Blaylock. But
What?
but Mookie Blaylock's nickname is Pearl Jam. So that was
Whoa.
it was Chili Peppers, Smashing Pumpkins, and Pearl Jam before they had become Pearl Jam. So that was it. It was a cool show. I met this girl who became like sort of my first love of my life there. She wrote her number down on a napkin with her lipstick. And it
Oh,
was
that's
Jen Potenza. Jen
classic.
Potenza. She was a cutie. And
How classic is that?
yeah,
And remember, if you got that number and you somehow lost it, it was over.
that was it. I
Over.
remember there was a girl that I met out and about, and so I was from uptown. This was definitely like she was a she was a rich girl. I met her downtown, and we exchanged information. And then like I left my house to go pick her up, but I remembered her address, but I didn't bring her phone number, and so I'm down there, and I'm like, oh no. like, I don't have her apartment number. And at that point, I was like, I knew her first name, but I didn't know her last name. So I get to the address. I'm like, oh no, I'll never be able to find her. And it turned out she owned the whole building. Her family owned
What?
the whole building. So I was like, oh, okay. And it was yeah, she was a cutie too. Wow,
What?
thinking back about those days of like
You see
running
what
around
I'm
the
saying?
city. Yeah,
That's the whole point right there, is to go back and just remember, because those are the great times, man. Those are
yeah.
times you might not have a picture from it or video, but it's in your memory forever.
And the fact that there was no cell phone, I couldn't. That would have been it. I would not
That
have
was
been
it.
able to find her if yeah, that was.
What would you say now to yourself, like a 16-year-old David?
Don't be so tough on yourself,
That's great.
right? Like, I think that a lot of times, boys and girls, right? I can't speak as much for girls, but I know for boys that they're hard on themselves, and that they have these expectations of themselves that are unrealistic, and and that it's okay to fail, and that all of this journey is not for anybody else, it's for yourself. So just enjoy the shit out of it. Like, don't be so serious about what would be insignificant things, right? Because that was always it, especially in like the being an actor is intense. Um, and there's a lot riding on, you feel there's a lot riding on everything, right? Like, you don't work for a year and your career is over, oh my gosh. And it's just because you don't know what the future holds. And yeah, so I would tell myself, don't worry, don't be so hard on yourself. It's a long road, and you're going to take a lot of paths that you never even expected. So
It's a great point, because I'm thinking of a 16-year-old me, and there was so many things you worried about, and you wanted to just, and this stuff never happened, or and the fail part is so real, because even like when I got out of high school, and then like I was in my 30s, and I spoke to like girls that were in high school, just like, hey, how you doing? And they were like, oh, did you know so and so liked you? I'm like, wait a sec, I didn't know this. I wish I
yeah,
knew. I wish I would have just opened my mouth and talked to girls that maybe I thought I couldn't get, but they all like me. And
yeah,
it's like
yeah,
those are the times where you wish you could just like, hey, just go do it. Just be stop overthinking, right? I think when you're young,
totally.
especially, just an
Overthinking.
overthinking.
Yeah.
What were like holidays like in your house growing up? Did your parents host? Did you go places? Was it a big thing?
We had, Thanksgiving was a huge deal. We shared a holiday. We still share the same holiday with the same family who went to
Wow.
high school with me. And that family is related to like my best childhood friend. My brother's best childhood friend is their daughter. So like, we, the Warwinds, um, we've been having that Thanksgiving for 39 years. And it has grown and shrunk and grown and shrunk, but the two main families are always there. So there's always at least, 12 people there. And then I think at the height, like when we were maybe just out of high school, we would get like 30 or 40 people in that house,
Wow.
and that was a lot of fun. So that was always Passover and Thanksgiving were our two big holidays, and we had a Passover for a long time. Um, it's harder now that I'm in LA. Like, it means I have to fly back, so I got to pick one, right? So I pick Thanksgiving usually, um, and then Christmas. My dad was Jewish. My mom was Mormon, and so sometimes I would go to Utah for Christmas, and that was like a real Christmas. First of all, it was always snowing,
Yeah.
and it was cold. And my grandpa was a bishop in the Mormon church, which sounds a lot more than it really is. There are a lot of bishops in the Mormon church, but it meant that it was like a religious holiday. And then I have a bunch of cousins there that I'm close with. And when I was younger, I was particularly close with. They were like extended. They were like brothers. Um, so that was I remember those big Christmases. I think 3 times we went to Utah and had Christmas there. Other than that, my parents aren't really religious, so and then politically, the 4th of July had mixed um, meanings in our house, and because they were community activists, radical lefties. So, yeah, Thanksgiving and Passover. Those are great holidays that I still love to celebrate with my kids.
That's so cool. Speaking of your kids, do you watch any shows that you grew up on? Are your kids into any old stuff or cartoons or anything that you could relate to? Like, oh shoot, I used to watch that or anything.
Wow.
It's funny because
Well,
my daughter got into like Garfield. And now she's like into like Alvin. And I'm like, yo, you're an old soul. This is great. Cause like the Garfield's, it's the new Garfield, but it's still pretty cool. And it like just brings back memories. And sometimes I'm sitting there with her watching it and I'm like, I revert back to her age and I'm start thinking
yeah.
about the times that, it's just a fun, sometimes it's just a cycle, right? We look at it and it's like, wow, man, I remember being this age and now I'm this old, and
But it's
it's,
also the same stories still resonate, right?
yes.
Like I get what you're asking. So Calvin and Hobbes is something that Harrison has really taken to, because I think Calvin is very reminiscent of my son, um, in a wild way. So he loves reading Calvin and Hobbes. Um, so we just started playing him movies because he would get frightened up until just recently.
Mhm.
So it's now you can watch these movies that. So he watched Ghostbusters. I will say he watched Ghostbusters a little too early, and some of the stuff freaked him out. But now he really likes Ghostbusters. He watched Jurassic Park, and that was a lot of fun for him. We have E.T. is going to come up pretty soon. He's going to get to watch E.T. Um, we were talking about another one. Although my wife thinks we were talking about Home Alone, but she thinks it might be too scary because the
Okay, hold on.
burglars are trying to get into the
Let
house.
time out. Let me intervene there. I did that with my daughter a little too young, and she kind of like I saw her face, and she's like, "Daddy, could we watch something else?" And I was like, "Oh, I messed up." So now she's 10. It's hysterical now.
Right,
But
right.
when we first started watching it, and then I said, "Let's watch it again," and she goes, "Dad, like those times when he gets hit with all that stuff, is it gonna?" And I was like, "All right, I get it. She needs a few
Well,
years."
even when I
So
told Harrison what it was about, I was like, so the family, they have a lot of kids and they leave to go away and they forget the son at home. And he went, and I was like, oh, we're not watching it.
we're not watching it. That's
We're not
it.
watching
No.
it.
Yeah, so
So,
it's probably better to hold off a bit because I
yeah,
went through the same thing with that.
yeah.
Is there an age that you would travel back to? Like if you could, I'm not saying you want to live in the past or anything like that, but like is there one cool age or it time frame that you're like, wow, like this was my favorite time of being here? Or is it now?
You know, I think that I've kind of found who I want to be, who I am now, and I'm doing what I want to do. Um, there's an interesting battle that happens when you're a young actor and maybe musician where other people speak for you and take your power sometimes, and that's agents or managers or whoever, right? Also because you're young, and so people are telling you who you are a lot, and that was a struggle for my whole career, like to just be what they wanted me to be. And then I said, fuck it. and then like I built my own thing that didn't exist, that was no one is in charge of it. I'm in charge of it. I do it. And that has been also, I never knew if I wanted to have kids. I never knew if I wanted to get married. Like there was this whole thing where there was a different path for me where I was going to live up in the Hollywood Hills, party with my friends, maybe still be an actor, still, do that forever. And our mutual friend lived up there in that big house with us,
Yes.
and that could very have easily have been the path. And then, and then I came to, like, I had an epiphany, and I was like, no, I do want to experience these other things, and maybe it's time for me to stop acting so that I can do that. And yeah, so here I am. I have this television show. that, um, when I was a kid and I was on movies, I always looked at the producers and directors as the bosses. Like I was like, oh, one day I'll get to be the boss. And so now I get to be the boss, which is, it's a good feeling.
From scratch. Phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's
Thanks.
phenomenal. Just the
Yeah.
journey of it, just how it you see sides of there's a million food shows, but it's not to me it's not just a food show. It's the expedition, the preparation, the journey where it
Yeah.
comes from, the place. There's so many. I mean, it's phenomenal. And I'm
Yeah.
proud. I'm proud of you, bro, cuz
Oh, thank you,
like
man.
that it's such a good show, and I'm happy to hear and feel that you're doing what you want to do. It's very relatable what you're saying. I had a record deal when I was 25. I had everybody in my ear. I loved doing it. Was very organic.
Yeah.
And then it became when you sign to a major deal, it's not organic anymore. You kind of like they put you in this puppet as a puppet. And after a while, there's 95% of the people around you are there to benefit them, you
That's right.
know, and you kind of, I got out of it. I still do it because I'm a creator and I love it, but I do it freely now. It's my
Yeah.
stuff. So if I
Yeah.
do it, I want to release something, I do it, I record it, I put it out myself, and no one can tell me anything. So I can understand your feeling, and it's just like I want to do what I want to do on my own terms.
Yeah. You said it better than me. I took a long circular way of saying exactly that,
Well,
but that's it
well, it
right
was
there.
easier because you said all those things, and I just summed it up. But yeah, I could relate, and I totally get it. Just a few more things. So this is fun. 3 dinner guests.
Oh, wow.
It could take as long as you want. It's not an easy one.
3 dinner guests.
From any time, past, present, living or dead.
I like Bernie Sanders. I want Bernie Sanders to
Wow.
be there. I think he's just a badass. He reminds me of my dad. And also, I think, like, if there's ever been a person who's been so on the right side of history and, of fighting for people, it would be like him or Chomsky. But I'll take Bernie. I worked on the last 2 Bernie campaigns actively as a digital. I produced a lot of their digital content, but I
Oh,
never got to meet
nice.
him. So I'd take Bernie. I'd take Bernie Sanders. I'd take um, I'd take Carl Sagan. Um, I feel like his books um, sort of open me up to reading nonfiction, to reading about kind of this idea of like that we are. He really was like we are the small grain of sand, on this little rock floating out in the universe, and there is this much bigger world out there. But he also spoke to um, the other side of it is that if this is all we are, then we have to work hard to make this the best possible place. So I think that would be really cool. Um, I think my grandpa Harry, uh, he passed when I was kind of young. I didn't really get to. I knew him just as this like big, imposing grandpa figure. He was like a big guy, worked on the railroads. He was a lumberjack out of Montana. That was like if you talk about like our childhood in the 80s, this guy was like windswept Montana, and the stories I hear from my mom and that side of the family, he is this kind of like Paul Bunyan-esque, huge, bigger than life figure. But when I met him, his health was kind of failing, and I think I'd love to meet young Harry Sterner,
Wow.
because that would be really cool.
Can you imagine the questions you know, at your age now, the questions that you'd be able to ask him that you couldn't when you were younger, or like, wow, he must talk about stories,
Yeah.
like his story from a different place, different time, just like,
They
wow.
homesteaded. It was basically like as much land as you could put a fence around was yours, right? And then like they had grizzly bears that came through their cabins. My mom, as a kid, lived that like Laura Ingalls Wilder childhood where like, you couldn't go from the house to the outhouse because there was a grizzly hanging out. And or the
What?
moose came through. Like just wild stuff.
It's wild because
So
and you grew up in New York City,
so
and you're
different.
like, it's such a different.
So different.
Wow, I
Yeah.
love it.
My mom wanted to get out of New York like the whole time I was there. She's like, Montana, you got to see Montana. You got to go back to Montana, blah, blah, blah. And they're still there. My mom is still there. Even though I left, she's
still there.
Yeah,
She got transplanted. Now she's just a New Yorker. Tough to
she
leave.
totally is. And that, like, whenever I'm saying, like, because New Yorkers have that thing about them where, like, they're going to tough it out.
Yeah.
They're tougher than anybody, and they're going to tough it out. And so, like, I'll be like, it's really cold. There's a cold front coming on. Why don't you guys come out to LA? It's going to be in the 70s. And they're like, yes, but there's earthquakes and fires. I'm like, that's not the conversation we're having right now. We're not the what's better. I'm saying that in the next week, it's going to be freezing on the East Coast, and it's warm here. Come here.
It's almost like you can't tell a New Yorker, especially from their generation. It's almost like you're dissing them if you're saying something like, well, don't talk about New York like that. We're good. We're fine. You know, it's like
right.
They always
Only
have that
we
like
are allowed to talk about New York
yeah,
like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's great stuff. All right, last little thing I do is called one word. So I'm going to say one word. I'm going to say something. You give me one word. Mom.
Oh, love.
Dad.
Brilliant.
Wife.
Oh, sweetheart.
Your children.
Everything.
Wow. New York.
Oh, the city.
LA.
Molasses.
Big.
Me.
David Moscow.
Big.
Yes. That was phenomenal. Yes. Perfect. Brother, listen, man. That was a pleasure. It really was.
This was dope.
Yeah, we went back in time.
I love this show. Thank you.
Thank you,
walked
brother.
me
Listen.
down memory lane, man. That was really cool.
That's all I wanted to do.
Peace, my friend.
They say you can't live in the past, but we can hang out there for a while.